On this channel, I've done a lot of Game Boy mods, and over the years, there's just been a huge amount of progress made in the scene. Modding evolved from excess shell trimming, hot glue, and soldering, to now basically drop-in kits that nearly anyone can do, which is fantastic. And well, here we are again, with another new kit, so I gotta make another video covering it. This is the M2 screen kit from FunnyPlaying. Let's take a look. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. Today we're going to take a look at yet another LCD kit for the Game Boy Advance. Now I've reviewed quite a few of these over the years and for the most part they've gotten better and easier to install. And this here is just the latest iteration of what seems like an endless wave of Game Boy screen kits. This particular model is called the M2 kit and it comes in two flavors, one for the original Game Boy Advance and the other for the SP. Also, it appears that this time around, there's a lot more lens color options, which is always a good thing and really allows you to dial in that customized look that you're looking for. And as has become the norm, the glass lens is laminated to the screen, so no need to worry about any annoying dust getting in between the lens and the screen itself. Now, I'll of course be showing how to install these kits in both the original Game Boy Advance as well as the SP, and I'll have timestamps down below so you can check out the topics that most interest you regarding these kits. Now, you might be wondering where the name M2 comes from, and it actually ties back to the origin of the LCD panel itself. In this case, the screen is sourced from a Canon M2 mirrorless camera. Just like the older Q5 kits, which used panels originally found in a BlackBerry Q5 smartphone, these displays are being repurposed for use in our Game Boy handhelds. My guess, FunnyPlaying likely managed to secure a large batch of these M2 panels, allowing them to continue production of these kits as supplies of the older Q5 or other previously used panels start to run out. Anyway, what if anything makes the M2 panel different from any of the other kits that we've looked at? Well, there's not really a huge difference here, but since these panels were pulled from a camera instead of a smartphone, it's possible that the quality is a bit better. After all, accurate color representation is more important when reviewing photos. According to FunnyPlaying's website, these panels offer 99% coverage of the sRGB color gamut. That basically means that they're tuned for high color accuracy. Now, that's great for looking at photos, but is it necessary for Game Boy Advance games? Well, we'll have to see about that. What's interesting is that FunnyPlaying actually also included a new option in their on-screen menu, which might be designed to take advantage of that added color accuracy. We'll dive into that a little bit later in the video as well. But first, I gotta give a huge shout out to Retro Game Repair Shop for sending over these screen kits along with some of the other great mods we'll be checking out today. You'll find links to everything I'm using down below in the video description. Now before we jump right into the installation tutorial of these two kits, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's video, PCBWay. If you have an idea for a new mod or want to assemble an open source project, PCBWay provides you with the tools to make them a reality. From 3D printing services in an array of materials, all the way to other services like CNC machining, injection molding, and of course PCB and flex ribbon fabrication. So when it comes to taking your retro mods to the next level, PCBWay is the place to make that happen. Check out the link in the description for PCBWay to get $5 off your first order, and again a huge thank you to PCBWay for sponsoring this video. Alright, with that out of the way, let me show you how to install these kits into the original Game Boy Advance and the SP. Alright, so we'll be installing this kit in both the original GBA as well as the SP, but we're going to go ahead and get started with the SP. And since we're also replacing the shell, buttons, and speaker, we really just need the motherboard. Now, as with all these aftermarket kits, it is strongly recommended to test them first, which is exactly what I'm doing here. Now, an easy way to power the SP on is to just pop on the rear shell onto the motherboard like this, and then drop in the battery. Then just switch it on, and as you can see, the LCD fires right up, so that means we're good to go. Just note that Retro Game Repair Shop only accepts returns or exchanges on kits that haven't been installed, so it is imperative that you test your kits first. Okay, so here are the hinges I took from my donor SP, and I'm just installing the new hinge covers that came with the replacement shell. Once that's done, we can go ahead and insert the hinges into our new shell. The white one here goes on the right side. And once it's seated, you can open the clamshell and then fully seat the hinge in place. And then we can go ahead and take the black hinge, which goes on the left side, and insert it into the shell as shown. Now, these are keyed, so they only go in one way. And once it's in, just open the clamshell and fully seat the hinge. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and drop in the LCD panel. You'll see that I've already went ahead and installed the driver board and the ribbon cable. The LCD ribbon cable is routed behind the driver board, which is then mounted to the back of the LCD, just about 5 millimeters from the top. Next, you're going to need to coil the ribbon cable like this, and then feed the end through this narrow slit in the lower housing. Then you can go ahead and drop the LCD backing cover, and as you can see, I'm using a pretty cool Pokédex themed shell, which I think pairs really nicely with the red bezel on the LCD lens. Anyway, now we'll go ahead and secure the backing using the 5 short tri-wing screws. Alright, now we can go ahead and connect the LCD to the motherboard. Now this next part that I'm about to do is optional, but I'm going to go ahead and solder in the single included wire that lets us control the settings on the LCD. The touch sensor does the same exact thing, but I'm going to go ahead and wire this in anyway. So here I'm going to go ahead and pre-tin test point Q12B, and then I'm going to solder in the included wire. The other end of the wire goes here on this pad on the ribbon cable. Alright, now we can go ahead and drop in all of our buttons, membranes, and that brand new speaker. These are machined aluminum buttons and I absolutely love the way they feel. Now it's just a matter of buttoning it all up. And definitely don't forget to snap in the retaining nut for the rear shell battery cover before installing it. And as a finishing touch, I also picked up some rear labels from Retro Game Repair Shop and went ahead and stuck them on. Alright, and there you have it, the M2 kit is installed in the SP. Now let's do the same thing for the original GBA. Again, we just need to isolate the motherboard since we're going to also be reshelling the handheld. I noticed that the speaker is a bit dingy, so I also decided to replace it with a brand new one from FunnyPlaying. It's super simple, just heat the pad up with your soldering iron and pull the wires out. And then just solder in the new one in its place. Nice. Now taking a look at the LCD connector on the motherboard, you'll see a marking that shows which ribbon cable we're going to need. Mine is a 40-pin model, so we'll use the 40-pin ribbon. A motherboard with a 32-pin connector will have a 32 here instead of the 40, but the kit does include both the 40 and 32-pin ribbon cables. So here I've got the 40-pin ribbon cable and I'll go ahead and install it. On this side of the ribbon, you'll see 3 pads labeled L, R, and S. These let you wire up the control buttons for the OSD, which is the select button, and the L and R triggers. I just want to reiterate that this is totally optional since the touch sensor can fully support the OSD. But for this video, I will show you how to wire it up. So after tinning all the pads, I went ahead and also soldered in the wires. So test point TP8 is for the right trigger. So go ahead and connect the wire coming from the R pad on the ribbon. TP2 here is for the select button. So we're going to go ahead and solder in the wire that's connected to the pad labeled S. And finally, TP9 is for the left trigger. So by process of elimination, we're going to go ahead and solder the wire coming from the L pad. Okay, now we can grab our new FunnyPlaying front shell and drop in the LCD. Then go ahead and connect the driver board as shown. Next, we can go ahead and grab the included LCD bracket and make sure it's oriented like this, with the little curved notch here in the lower left corner. And also be sure that this part of the bracket sits below this tab in the shell. Next, go ahead and drop in the buttons and membranes. Now, when you go to connect the ribbon cable to the driver board, it does need to be routed underneath the bracket like this. Now, this next part was a bit tricky as the space is limited, but go ahead and peel the release paper from the touch sensor and stick it to the front face of the shell. You can kind of see where I placed it here, and it is a bit of a tight spot and is hard to capture on camera. But again, you do want it on the front face of the shell and not the top part. That's actually pretty important, and I will explain it a bit later in the video. Anyway, now we can lower the motherboard into the front shell and start to button everything up. Alright, and that's how you install the M2 kit in the original Game Boy Advance. As usual, these kits really do look amazing when installed, and I even added a few extras like metal buttons on the SP and these glitter-infused ones for the original GBA, both of which look fantastic. And it's just amazing to see how far we've come in the Game Boy modding scene in what seems to be a very short period of time. Anyway, let's go ahead and take a look at the features that the M2 kits bring to the table. So basically the features are exactly the same on the original GBA and the SP, so no surprises there, as they're essentially identical, so we'll use the SP to discuss the features of the panel. Now right off the bat, since we did wire the brightness button to the kit, we can use it to change the brightness, of which there are 15 levels. Now of course we also have the touch sensor here on the back, which does the same thing if you tap it, and it cycles through all the levels as well. Now to access the on-screen display or OSD, you can either hold the brightness button if you solder the single wire, or tap and hold the touch sensor. And once it opens, the first thing you're able to adjust is again the brightness. Tapping the touch sensor or the brightness button will cycle through all the levels yet again. Now to get to the next option for adjusting, just go ahead and do a quick hold of the button or again the touch sensor until you advance to the next option. Now this next setting allows you to change the color scheme, and here you can see them all on screen. Now do take into consideration that my camera may not be capturing all the schemes exactly as they're represented in person, but this should give you a pretty good idea of how they look when compared to each other. Now the next option is the display effect. This is basically your scan lines. The first one is the full pixel mode with no scan lines, while the second is called interpolation algorithm, which just makes the image look a bit softer. Not really a huge fan of this particular option. And of course the last one is horizontal scan lines. Again, I tend to not like using any scan lines or really any of these image effects because they do darken the image quite a bit, so I just typically leave them turned off. Next up is the frame blending mode. This setting is especially useful for games like Zelda Link's Awakening, with a good example being Bow Wow's Chain. The developers here use the Game Boy's low refresh rate to create a sort of transparency effect by rapidly flickering the object on and off. But with modern LCDs like the one used in this kit, those flickers become a lot more noticeable because of the panel's much higher refresh rate. To fix that, FunnyPlaying introduced frame blending mode, which creates the original transparency effect without the distracting flicker. So if you're playing a game that does rely quite a bit on this flickering trick for transparency, I definitely recommend leaving this setting on. Now this last mode is also the new one. It's called Color Gamut, or CG. Basically, it gives us 3 different color presets to choose from. First up is Warm, which as you would expect, gives us a warmer, more yellowish tone. The next one is Highlight, which boosts the brightness of the whites and gives us an overall more vibrant look. And finally, there's Original, which lands somewhere in between the two. Personally, this is the setting that I prefer as it feels the most balanced. Now, is this a game-changing feature? Not really, but hey, more options are always better than fewer, at least in my opinion. So one more thing that I wanted to discuss is the touch sensor, especially when it comes to the M2 kit for the original Game Boy Advance. I've seen a few reports of the screen randomly changing brightness on its own, and I actually ran into this similar issue with a different kit a while back, and I suspect that it has to do with how close that touch sensor is placed to the data lines on the ribbon cable. In my case, I positioned the sensor on the front-facing part of the shell rather than up top where I think most people tend to place it. It's a bit hard to show clearly here, but I do believe by placing it further away from the data lines, there's less of a chance of it picking up interference, maybe like EMI or something, and falsely triggering that brightness change. Now, that's just my personal theory, but so far, placing it here has completely eliminated the phantom dimming issue that others have reported. Now, with the M2 kit for the original Game Boy Advance, the touch sensor works exactly the same as the SP. But using the buttons is a bit more intuitive, with the select button being used to access the OSD, and with the LNR triggers for adjusting each of the options. So overall, these are both fantastic kits with some solid features. But now let's get into the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, just like its predecessors, especially the more recent ones, this is one of the easiest kits to install, particularly if you choose to not solder any of the wires. And again, soldering in those wires is completely optional. Another plus that I'm always just a huge fan of is the laminated glass lens. It not only makes installing even simpler, but it also eliminates any chance of dust getting trapped between the lens and the LCD panel. It's a small detail, but I think it makes a big difference. Now, when it comes to the SP version of the kit specifically, there's an added bonus. It's compatible with pretty much any SP shell. That gives you a ton of flexibility when it comes to customizing your build with different shell options. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for the original Game Boy Advance version, which brings me to the cons. Now, when it comes to the original Game Boy Advance, you're basically locked into using FunnyPlaying shells. That means you're limited to their lineup of colors and designs. That said, it's not a total deal breaker, as they do offer a wide selection, and shops like Retro Game Repair Shop even give you the option to print custom designs directly onto the shell. So while it is a limitation, it's not a major one in my opinion. And as I mentioned previously, there have been reports of the screen randomly changing its brightness on its own. Thankfully, I haven't experienced this on my particular unit, and I think it's largely because of where I installed the touch sensor. Still, that doesn't make the issue any less frustrating for those that have run into it. Ideally, FunnyPlaying would address this with a new updated ribbon cable, something that they could either offer separately or include in future kits. It would be great if folks didn't have to replace the entire kit just to fix this one issue. In the meantime, my suggestion is to place the touch sensor on the face of the shell rather than the top. This small change does seem to prevent any phantom brightness problems. Another downside, again for the original GBA version, is that the installation can be a bit fiddly, especially with the required bracket. It tends to get in the way, and if you decide to solder the optional wires, it limits how freely the ribbon cable can be moved since it is now tethered to the motherboard. And one last little nitpick is the labeling on the ribbon cable for the original GBA version. By default, the left and right triggers are mapped in a way that felt a little unintuitive to me. I actually ended up switching them so that the right increases the setting and the left decreases them. It is a small thing, but worth mentioning, and it happens to be just an easy fix. So where do we go from here? Well, I think we will continue to see new screen mods, new shells, and other cool innovations for the Game Boy line of handhelds. But at this point, the improvements are pretty marginal. These kits are already excellent, so there's little to improve upon. So who's this kit for? Honestly, if you already have a backlit screen and you're happy with it, there's no urgent reason to upgrade. But if you got an unmodded console or you're looking to build a brand new, perfect custom GBA, the M2 kit is a fantastic option. Now also, just as a reminder, I do have a second channel, which I'll have linked in the video description, so definitely check that out. I have other content there, a little bit more casual, and I go over sort of smaller mods that I wouldn't necessarily cover on this channel. So again, I'll have that link down below for you to check out. Well folks, there you have it. The latest and greatest LCD kits for the Game Boy Advance and SP. Now if you enjoyed this video, I really think you'll like this one here, so check it out. And as always, thank you all so much for tuning in today, and I'll catch you again next time.